Okay, so you've seen the headlines, you've probably even used them. These large language models today are just incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. Writing code, simulating conversations, reasoning. It's pretty amazing stuff.
It really is. But when you stop and think about what they're actually processing, human language, right, which is full of, complex relationships, nested ideas, hierarchies.
Yeah, it's not simple stuff. It's got deep structure.
Exactly. So does the fundamental math space they live in, the geometry they use, does it actually make sense for that kind of data?
That's a fantastic question. And it really cuts right to the core of what these sources we're looking at explore. Because if you think about most of these cutting edge LLMs,
Yeah,
under the wood, they're doing all their calculations, similarity, distance, you name it, basically in what we call Euclidean space.
right, Euclidean. That's the flat geometry we all learned in school, like graph paper.
Precisely. Flat paper, a standard grid, that's the world their vectors live in.
Okay. But language isn't really flat like that, is it? When you analyze it.
That's the argument. Natural language seems to have this inherent structure that's more hierarchical. Think about concepts. Animal contains mammal, which branches into dog, which includes beagle. We've got these levels.
Like a tree structure almost.
Exactly like a tree. So trying to cram that kind of branching, layered structure efficiently onto a flat piece of paper, well, it feels like you might run into problems, right?
Yeah, like you're distorting it somehow.
That's the key idea driving the research in this stack we've got. It's a collection of papers, technical notes, study guides, all focused on a new approach called HELM.
Hell, hyperbolic large language models.
Exactly. Hyperbolic, moving beyond that familiar flat space into a different kind of geometry altogether.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then, to unpack these sources, get into the academic innovations behind HELM, and really understand why researchers think switching geometry, moving to hyperbolic space, could be a big deal for AI, especially for handling that messy, hierarchical nature of language we were just talking about.
Precisely. It's all about exploring how that fundamental mathematical environment shapes what a model can actually learn and represent effectively.
All right, let's get into it. So, looking at the sources, what's the first big piece of evidence they point to? This geometric mismatch idea.
Well, what's really striking is they don't just theorize about it, they actually show evidence. They start by analyzing the outputs of existing powerful Euclidean LLMs, models like LLaMA 2, Gemma, DeepSeek Mo.
Okay, so they looked at the actual word representations, the embeddings these models learn.
Exactly. They examined the local geometry within those embedding spaces, and they used a measure called Ricci curvature. Basically, it tells you how space is bending or curving right at a specific point.
Ricci curvature.
Okay, and what they found was really interesting. These token embeddings consistently showed a wide range of negative Ricci curvatures.
Negative curvature. Okay, help me picture that. Flat as a table, positive curvature is like a sphere. What's negative?
The classic analogy is a saddle shape, or maybe like a Pringles chip. Space kind of curves away from you in different directions,
Okay.
and in a space that has constant negative curvature, which is what we call hyperbolic space, a really key property emerges. Its volume grows exponentially as you move away from a point.
Exponentially. Wow. That's very different from flat space.
Totally different. In flat Euclidean space, volume grows polynomially, like pi times squared for area. But in hyperbolic space, it explodes exponentially. This gives it this incredible sort of breathing room.
Breathing room.
Yeah, it means it can naturally accommodate structures that branch out really rapidly, like those hierarchies or trees we talked about, without squishing things together or distorting the distances between points nearly as much as flat space would.
Ah, okay. So if language really does have this tree-like hierarchical structure, trying to flatten it onto Euclidean space is like trying to flatten an orange peel perfectly. You get rips and stretches.
That's a great analogy.
But hyperbolic space, with its exponential expansion, is like a naturally stretchy surface that fits the hierarchy better.
Exactly. That negative curvature and exponential volume seem to align much better with data that inherently branches out. And the sources argue this isn't just some abstract mathematical point. They cite earlier work suggesting this mismatch, this geometric clash,
Yeah.
can actually cause concrete problems in training LLMs, things like instabilities during training, or even leading to models that don't generate text as well as they could.
It's like using the wrong tool for the job, fundamentally. The geometry itself is hindering performance. Okay, so the problem seems clear. Euclidean space might just be the wrong fit for language's structure.
That's the hypothesis.
But, okay, if hyperbolic space is potentially a better fit, why haven't hyperbolic models taken over already? You hear about Euclidean models all the time. The sources mention limitations with previous attempts, right?
Yes, they're quite clear about that. Earlier attempts to build hyperbolic transformers ran into some major roadblocks that stopped them from really competing with modern Euclidean giants. They list three main shortcomings.
What were they?
First, the geometric spaces they used were too rigid. Often, a whole transformer block would be assigned just one fixed curvature value.
But wait, you just said the analysis of real text embeddings showed a wide range of negative curvatures.
Precisely. So, using a single fixed curvature just couldn't capture that variation, that complex geometric reality within the language data itself. That was limitation one, inflexibility.
Okay, makes sense. What else?
Second, they were missing some essential components, tools that are basically standard issue in modern Euclidean LSMs now, things like sophisticated positional encodings, like rote or robust normalization layers.
The nuts and bolts needed for stable training and good performance at scale.
Exactly. Those were often underdeveloped or just missing in the earlier hyperbolic models. And third, they really struggle with scalability.
How so?
Many relied on adopting self-attention mechanisms to hyperbolic space, but those adaptations often kept the fundamental quadratic scaling problem memory use blowing up with the square the sequence length.
Ouch, yeah, that's a killer for handling long texts or building truly massive models.
It absolutely limited their size and practicality compared to the efficient architectures we see in Euclidean space today.
Okay, so good core idea, maybe, but the implementations were inflexible, missing key parts, and couldn't scale up.
That sums it up pretty well. They just couldn't really perform or train efficiently on the massive scale needed.
Right, and this is where HELM comes in, aiming to fix exactly those three things with some really novel academic work. This feels like the heart of it. Let's dive into these innovations.
Absolutely. This is where they introduce their core technical contributions, the modules designed specifically to make language modeling work effectively and scalably entirely within hyperbolic space.
And the first one tackles that inflexibility problem head on, right? It's called MICE, Mixture-of-Curvature Experts.
Yes, Mixture-of-Curvature Experts, or MICE. Now, you might have heard of Mixture of Experts, MO, in models like Mixtral. Usually that means routing tokens to different expert networks, often feed-forward layers.
Right, for specialization or efficiency gains.
Exactly. But HELM-MICE adds a crucial geometric twist. Here, each expert doesn't just process different tokens, each expert operates in its own distinct curvature space.
Wait, really? So instead of one block having one fixed curvature, the MICE layer has multiple pathways, and each pathway exists in its own little hyperbolic world with a potentially different negative curvature value.
That's precisely the innovation. It directly addresses that inflexible geometry limitation we talked about. Remember the finding that language embeddings show that range of negative curvatures.
Yeah.
MICE allows the model to adapt its geometry locally on the fly using different experts for different needs. It lets it capture that observed variation and encode much more fine-grained memetric structure. It gives the model flexibility.
That's really clever. Building the geometric adaptability right into the expert mechanism. Okay, cool. What about the next limitation, those missing pieces like positional encodings? Euclidean models love rope, rotary positional encodings.
Right. Rope is crucial for handling sequence order well and generalizing to different lengths. So HELM needed a hyperbolic counterpart. They developed HOPE, hyperbolic rotary positional encodings.
Hope? Okay. And does it work like rope? Does it have similar nice properties?
According to the theoretical analysis in the sources, yes. Like Euclidean rope, HOPE focuses on encoding relative positions between tokens, not absolute ones. That's important.
Okay.
It also naturally exhibits long-term decay, meaning attention tends to focus more on nearby tokens, which makes intuitive sense for language. And they show mathematically it allows attention across any distance and can learn complex positional patterns.
So it's not just a quick hack. There's a solid theory behind it, adapting rope's principles to hyperbolic geometry.
Exactly. It provides that crucial, theoretically sound way to handle sequence order natively within hyperbolic space, a big step towards parity with Euclidean models.
Definitely feels like plugging a major gap. Okay, limitation number 3. Scalability, that quadratic attention bottleneck. How does HELM get around that in hyperbolic space?
That's where HMLA comes in. Hyperbolic multi-head latent attention. The core idea here is to attack the memory footprint directly.
How?
Instead of doing the full attention calculation with the high-dimensional queries, keys, and values directly in hyperbolic space, HMLA first projects them down into a much smaller, lower-dimensional latent space.
Like a compressed space, just for the heavy lifting of attention.
Precisely. The attention mechanism operates efficiently in this compact, latent space, and then the results are projected back up to the original dimension.
And that saves memory.
Significantly. It drastically cuts down the size of that key value cache, which is a huge memory memory hog during inference, especially with long sequences. It also lowers memory usage during training. It changes the scaling complexity significantly.
Okay, that sounds like a critical engineering feat, getting that latent space projection to work correctly within the mathematics of hyperbolic geometry. That directly tackles the scaling problem that held back earlier models.
It's absolutely essential for making billion parameter scale hyperbolic LLMs even feasible to train and deploy.
Right. And one last piece you mentioned was missing before. Normalization layers, like RMS norm in Euclidean models.
Yes, that was the final key module they introduced, hyperbolic RMS norm, which they call RMS norm-L. It's designed to provide stable and robust normalization specifically for the Lorentz model of hyperbolic space that Helm uses.
And its key feature.
The sources highlight its invariance to input scaling. Just like Euclidean RMS norm, this property is really important for keeping gradients stable during training, preventing them from exploding or vanishing, especially in deep networks. It boosts robustness.
Okay, so putting it all together, Helm isn't just slapping hyperbolic math onto an existing transformer. They've systematically re-engineered the key components. MICE for flexible geometry, HOPE for position encoding, HMLA for scalable attention, and RMS norm-L for stability, all designed natively for hyperbolic space.
That's exactly right. Figure 3 in the sources shows how these modules fit together in the overall architecture, and they actually built models using these.
They did. What scale?
They built two main variants, HELM-MICE using the Mixture-of-Curvature Experts, and also a dense version called HEL-MD for comparison. And here's a milestone. They trained these as fully hyperbolic LLMs up to 1 billion parameters. That hadn't really been done effectively before.
1 billion parameters, fully hyperbolic. Wow. And how did they test them?
Table 1 shows the results. They trained HELM alongside comparable-sized Euclidean models, specifically LLaMA and DeepSeek v3 variants, all on the exact same dataset. 5 billion tokens from Wikipedia.
Okay, a fair comparison. And how did Helm stack up?
The results were pretty consistent across several standard benchmarks, multi-choice QA, reasoning tasks.
Like MMLU, ARC, common sense QA, those kinds of tests.
Exactly. HELM models, both MICE and the dense one, consistently outperformed their Euclidean counterparts trained on the same data.
Outperformed. By how much?
The paper reports gains of up to 4%.
Up to 4%? I mean, in LM leaderboards, people fight tooth and nail for fractions of a percent. So 4% sounds actually quite significant.
It really is significant, especially given it's a fundamentally different geometric approach. And what's maybe even more telling is where the biggest gains were seen.
Ooh.
They were particularly pronounced on the harder reasoning benchmarks like MMLU and ARC challenging.
Tasks that require deeper understanding and connecting ideas.
Precisely. This strongly suggests that using hyperbolic geometry, which seems better suited to language's inherent structure, might actually be enhancing the model's reasoning capabilities. And interestingly, HELM-MICE, the one with the flexible curvature experts, often came out on top, reinforcing the value of that specific innovation.
That makes intuitive sense. The geometry isn't just a weird quirk. It seems to be translating into better performance on complex tasks. Okay, but how do we know it's these specific new modules, MICE, HOPE, HMLA, that are making the difference? Did they isolate their effects?
Yes, they did proper ablation studies, which is crucial for academic rigor. Tables 2, 3, and 4 in the paper detailed these. They basically swapped components in and out to see the impact.
What did they find? For MICE, for example.
They compared HELM-MICE with its distinct curvatures per expert against a version where all experts shared the same fixed curvature called MICE-const. The results in Table 2 clearly showed that using distinct curvatures performed notably better. It proved the value of that flexibility.
Okay, so the flexible geometry really helps. What about the scalable attention, HMLA?
They compared it against using a standard but less memory-efficient hyperbolic multi-head attention, HMHA. Table 3 showed HMLA achieved performance that was just as good, sometimes even slightly better, but with those crucial memory savings.
Nice, efficient, and effective. And the positional encoding, HOPE.
They compared HOPE against older methods using learned positional encodings in hyperbolic space. Table 4 showed HOPE generally led to better performance across most of the evaluation tasks.
Got it. So these ablation studies really nail down that the performance gains aren't just from using hyperbolic space in general, but specifically from these novel, well-designed help components addressing the prior limitations.
Exactly. It validates their specific architectural contributions systematically.
This all sounds incredibly promising, but, research papers always have limitations. What did they acknowledge here? Where does this go next?
Yeah, they're upfront about a couple of things. First, while 1 billion parameters is a good scale for research, the models were trained on only 5 billion tokens. That's relatively small compared to the trillions of tokens used for giant commercial models.
Right, so maybe they haven't seen enough data yet to reach their full potential.
Potentially. Also, the training data was mostly Wikipedia. While diverse, it might lack exposure to certain domain, like maybe complex mathematical reasoning compared to broader web crawls.
Okay, fair points for initial research. So what's the next logical step then?
The sources explicitly point towards investigating scaling laws. We know scaling laws are huge for Euclidean LLMs, how performance improves with more data, more compute, bigger models.
Yeah.
The next big step is to do that for these hyperbolic models. Take HEL, push it to much larger scales, tens or hundreds of billions of parameters, train it on terabytes or petabytes of data, and see how it really scales compared to Euclidean models at those frontiers.
That would be the ultimate test, wouldn't it? Seeing if the geometric advantage holds or even grows at massive scale. Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, we've explored HELM, which is this really fascinating academically driven effort to rethink LLM foundations by matching the math space to language's geometry.
And the core takeaway, I think, is pretty powerful. By operating fully in hyperbolic space and, crucially, introducing these specific, innovative hyperbolic native modules, MICE for geometry, HOPE for positions, HMLA for scale, and RNS normal for stability, HEL shows real, measurable advantages, particularly in reasoning, over standard Euclidean approaches at the billion parameter scale. It really builds a strong case for using geometry that fits the data rather than forcing the data into flat space.
It absolutely does. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? We focused on language today, but think about all the other complex data out there, biological networks, social graphs, maybe even certain kinds of sensor data. How much of that also has some inherent complex, maybe non-Euclidean structure?
That's a great point.
Could applying these kinds of geometric insights, questioning the default assumption of flatness, unlock similar breakthroughs in other areas of AI and science? Or, playing devil's advocate, will those scaling laws they want to study just show that Euclidean models, if you throw enough data and compute at them, can brute force their way past any geometric awkwardness?
Yeah, which way will it go? Does geometry matter more, or does scale eventually trump geometry?
Exactly. Definitely gives you plenty to chew on until our next deep dive.